Hello everyone, welcome to Superhero Rewind Unscripted. It's me, Captain Logan, and joining me tonight is once again Austin the Day Ghost, and we are about to embark on our third part of our impromptu history of superhero movies. We are a week or two late on this one because we got real busy with some other things the last couple weeks, but we are finally back for this, and so I don't have the last part super fresh in my brain, but I think I more or less remember what we discussed last time and where we were in the timeline, Austin. We got through the 90s Batman franchise and the 80s and 90s Superman movies, and we were heading into the late 90s and what I think of as the growing pains period of superhero movies before it becomes the big sweeping genre that starts to bring in like 75% of Hollywood's take that it'll be once we get into the 2010s and beyond. And
it's funny, right? Because it kind of mirrors comics in that you have a period where Marvel starts and they just immediately take off and become the big thing, like in the 60s.
Yeah, and then you have DC kind of floundering, but they always have that one big thing that people care about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
At least
the only
time.
difference with comics is we haven't had the stabilization or Marvel going down, DC going up and back and forth and back and forth.
But there's that fear that we're coming into that maybe is about to happen, right? You know, it is starting to feel like maybe Marvel and DC can't both be great at the same time.
You call it fear, I call it hope.
Well, no, because I want them both to be great.
No, of course.
I would love to see an MCU reboot.
In a perfect world.
I would love to see an MCU reboot where we are right now. Not everybody's going to agree with this, but I don't want to get into the weeds with this right now, but we'll get to this. But like, I don't think the MCU we'll probably do like an epilogue, don't you think, when we get done with all of this, that maybe caps all this off and it's like, okay, where do we think we're headed? Like, I didn't think about that. Maybe we could turn this into a speculation cast.
That is true. Yeah, people love when we do speculation casts. So, but we'll do it right after we do the Daredevil Born Again speculation cast.
But I was just gonna say, I would love to get to the. We're not gonna do that. There's no. I would love to get an MCU reboot simultaneous with the DCEU reboot. That would be the perfect marriage for me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm willing to have Marvel was good for like 10 years. Let's have DC be good for 10 years and Marvel be bad. I'm willing to make that trade. But
on a selfish note, I have to keep watching all of them.
Yeah.
You can check out if you want to.
Eventually I will too, so.
Well, that's true. Anyway, because you're doing the commentary project with me, and that's everything, at least movie-wise. Thanks a lot for joining us tonight. If you're watching live, feel free to leave comments anytime during the show. We're going to interact with you as much as we can, super chat or otherwise. If you want to make sure that your feelings on anything we talk about tonight are heard, you can leave a super chat in any dollar amount, but don't feel like you have to do that. We'll do as many regular comments as we can as well. And feel free to throw in any facts that you want to make sure that we bring up about the superhero movies we discuss and the history within the hour that will be on the clock here in a second. We are timing these. And we're not, as I always say with these, we haven't done any preparation. We're going completely from memory. We're not going to look at anything but your comments. So if we get anything wrong, feel free to let us know, because that is bound to happen. And
I don't think we've had any of those comments yet. I think we're doing pretty well so far.
No, but we have had some useful. You guys might want to talk about this comments, or piggybacking off of something and helping to steer us in a good direction. There's been a little bit of that.
Yeah, exactly.
Appreciate you guys. Thanks a lot. Austin doesn't think that doing this live is even useful at all. He doesn't need you guys, but I really appreciate having you guys here. So.
I think you all are ants beneath me.
And don't let anybody ever tell you different. Okay. We're going to go ahead and get right into this, Austin, and I'm going to let you, as soon as I get the timer started. I always want to say, everybody, please press play. I'm going to get the timer started, and then I'm going to let you kind of steer us out of the Batman-Superman place into the late 90s and the growing pains period of what we used to think of as the superhero onslaught. And boy, did we have no idea how much of an onslaught it really could be. Here we go.
And I'm actually really glad this is coming up now, because of that. There was just that recent Goyer interview, which broadened my knowledge a little bit on one of the things we have to talk about tonight. So
did I miss it? Do I not know about this?
Possibly not. I don't know.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, I mean, I didn't know if you wanted to start the clock or not.
Oh, the clock is going.
Oh, crap! Sorry. Obviously the beginning of the Marvel thing starts with Blade, and Goyer just had a big interview thing where he talked about how this isn't all he talked about. I think he mainly talked about the DC stuff. But Blade came up, and he talked about how he and David Fincher pitched Blade, and the two of them were working on it pretty far into early development before Fincher left to do Seven, I think. So I never knew that he had such a big part of getting that off the ground.
Yeah, I didn't know that either. That probably has something to do with why he ended up directing 3.
Well, Goyer directs 3.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you didn't realize Goyer had that much to do with getting it off the ground.
No.
You mean Fincher? Okay, no, that's interesting. I didn't know that either.
I knew Goyer wrote all 3.
I knew he wrote them, but sorry, I misunderstood what point you were making.
Okay.
I thought you were saying that he convinced them to make it in the first place or something.
No, Goyer has scripts on every single character.
Oh, I know. It's ridiculous. He's written for everything.
Yeah.
Yeah,
no,
and
Spirit of Vengeance has a Goyer credit because they took elements from his 90s Ghost Rider script.
Oh, really?
I think so, but I could be wrong about that.
Yeah, Goyer has probably he's probably one of the writers that has some of the most produced movies and also some of the least produced movies. He's written so many scripts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, exactly. And they all have Goyerisms. But anyways,
that's right.
We start with Blade.
But I think since you brought him up, it's a good idea to tack on here right now, especially since we are getting into the 2000s and Batman Begins will come up eventually, even if it doesn't tonight with this hour. That I didn't really think about that. I don't want to say by himself, but is really important and instrumental in this period.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, he's a big part of starting the DCEU, which was more so what that interview was about.
For better or worse. Yeah, absolutely.
For worse, yeah. I know he talks a lot about the studio mandates and how he was let's just make a movie, and the studio was no, give us the MCU.
Yeah, I never wanted to blame him too much for it, although if the story is to be believed, he at kind of the 11th hour wanted the neck break thing.
Mm-hmm.
And that was always a really bad idea, but I was never sure if I bought that came from him and not Snyder.
Well, and there is just certain characters that I don't think Goyer's right for. This is the guy that has the famous She-Hulk only exists to give Hulk somebody to have sex with comment. His cousin. But,
Yeah, I forgot. You always bring that up. I always forget about that.
And there's a thing with him in Martian Manhunter, I think, where he said Martian Manhunter was like too dumb for movies or something. There's something with him in Martian Manhunter.
He's racist against green people. He just doesn't like green characters, it sounds like.
Yeah, exactly. But he's kind of starts us off here with Blade. Some superhero movies are always trying to ice skate uphill.
Yeah, and I gotta right away ask you the big question, like, how instrumental is Blade really? Because on the one hand, it's the post-Batman, the first, like, new franchise starter for a big budget, major superhero thing. In comic book thing, and it's dark and it's edgy and it's more for adults. But then on the other hand, a lot of people that saw that didn't even realize that it was based on a comic book.
But I think that's why that's important. Is because Blade comes out and it's just like a action movie of the time. And you don't have to necessarily know that it's a Marvel thing. And you go in and it's got the big Marvel logo before the movie. And I think that does a lot to say, like, no, superhero movies can be something else. Like, they don't necessarily have to be all the same. We can expand outwards, and I don't know that we really did more so like that at that point. But I do think that is important for the genre in that exact moment.
Well, we sort of did a little bit. I mean, I always said that that Blade and X-Men are sort of your 1-2 punch. For general audiences taking these things a little bit more seriously as things not, just for kids or just popcorn things. I mean, like, Blade is kind of a fun popcorn thing in its way, but again, it's darker, it's rated R. Like if we're thinking of Batman as finally darkening up that character, you get to Blade and you go, oh yeah, but you could also do like horror things in a comic genre and that kind of thing. At the same time, I would argue, Austin, that general audiences, even with the Marvel logo, are not thinking of Blade as a superhero movie.
Mm-hmm.
How many of them don't even notice the Marvel logo, or maybe for a second go, oh, that's interesting, weird, and then forget all about it? Like, I just don't remember the discussion around Blade being maybe comic book movies are finally going to be a thing. Like, I don't think anybody was predicting based on, I think it's important, but retroactively. I don't think anybody realized that it was headed in that direction, and I think it might be more important for studios taking these things seriously and finally being a little bit quicker to jump the gun and greenlight them than it is for audiences to start wanting to go to more of them.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly.
It definitely matters, but I think for general audiences, X-Men matters more. And then,
X-Men's X-Men,
and then Spider-Man becomes the most important thing.
Yeah. No, I mean, Blade is that you take just a random character nobody's heard of, that hasn't read a comic, and it's almost the 90s version of Guardians.
I was going to say, it's the Guardians thing.
Yeah, where you just take this thing and most people don't know what it is, and you just put it on screen.
And that's why it's more important for studios, because it suggests that there is a well to mine. I mixed that metaphor. From this kind of material that people will go see if you find the right stuff. Mm-hmm. And that it doesn't have to, importantly, that it also doesn't already have to have a track record.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah, we can take some risks on some of this stuff. Just make a good movie and it'll pay off.
What's really interesting is that the whole genre, as it's kind of like swirling around in the primordial soup right here, because the superhero movies that came before it, even the really popular ones, Austin and I have been discussing as sort of prototypical movies, in that they're thought of as adventure fare and action fare before superhero becomes a genre, where it's the exception maybe that proves the rule, where it's like, okay, a couple of these things can really bring in the dollars, but by and large, it's, if you keep doing them, and this might be where we're at right now to people, if you keep doing them, it'll just be rinse and repeat. We're just repeating ourselves, and you get into the late 90s with some of these, and you actually have more failures through the 90s with things based on comics than you have successes. And yet we still end up with a comparative onslaught where now it feels like a genre. When you got X-Men and then it started getting sequels, you got Spider-Man, it starts getting sequels, Batman comes back in a big way. All of this before '08. I don't want to even talk about '08 yet. All of this stuff from '99 up until 2008. You get Ghost Rider, you get the Fantastic Four movies. Compared to now, and especially to a few years ago, it feels really quaint. It feels like we got a smattering of random superhero movies, and some of them managed to be franchises, and some of them didn't, and you didn't really have any shared universes yet. But at the time, it was a big deal. It was suddenly we talked about superhero as a genre in a way that we never had before.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what helps is that you have Superman, and Superman runs its course, and then you have Batman, and Batman runs its course, and you have like things outside of that that are coming out, and like you have Ninja Turtles, which was a big hit, but like you don't have that like boom Superman and then boom Batman, and they're both having sequels, and then boom, I don't know, Wonder Woman. You know what I mean? Like you just keep going. Where we got Blade, and then X-Men, and then Spider-Man, and then Batman's back, and Hellboy did really well. Like we just
Fantastic Four got a sequel.
Yeah, somehow.
Somehow, yeah.
Daredevil did really well. It got a spin-off.
Yeah, got a spin-off. Yeah.
It still made money.
And all of this in a span of like 8 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
so
exactly.
You start getting, I don't think people really counting it like we do now, but I think we got to a place in the mid-2000s where on average you got 2 a year.
Mm-hmm. When it's 2004? Or no, I think it's 2003, where you have like even more than that. I think you have like 3 or 4.
Yeah, and if you start counting things that are just based on comics that aren't technically superhero or that kind of walk that line, you do start getting. You got Sin City, you got Constantine, you got 300. Like we start making a lot more like straight up comic book movies, and all of the things I guess 300's a little later. No, what is that? What year does that come out?
Is that 2007?
I was gonna say. I mean, it's a couple years before Watchmen, so it's 06, 07.
I think it's 07.
And you get other things that people again don't even realize are based on comics, like Red.
Yeah.
And
no, I feel like your Sin Cities
Wanted
and
Constantine
like is where like Blade fits in, right? Where you don't necessarily have to know that it's a comic book, but it's doing a lot for the genre.
Well, and I'm glad you said that, because one big question I wanted to ask you is, how important is The Matrix?
Very important.
I think
especially visually.
I think it's very important visually.
But it's also weird
for better or worse. But because again, I don't think anybody is looking at that going, a comic book movie, or even this feels like a superhero thing. But I think it's almost a subconscious thing where when it's kind of like. It's kind of like Star Wars: The Lord of the Rings or something, where in a way you can open the floodgates to a genre with a thing like that, where The Matrix isn't even based on a comic book, but it feels so comic book that I think it's got people primed for superhero movies.
And comic book wise, I think it's important. The Blade comes out like right before The Matrix too, because that feels like it's like a Matrixy movie, but it's not.
But wasn't actually influenced by it, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
And isn't even cyberpunk.
Mm-hmm. But like a lot of the hallmarks of The Matrix are in that, and then obviously like we're gonna get like the leather suits and all that stuff. A lot of it comes down to visuals.
Boy, that's a good point. And X-Men was doing the leather thing before The Matrix comes out.
Yeah, you got X-Men
around the same time. Yeah, they come out that summer.
And then Daredevil's got the leather thing. And then obviously like Fantastic Four and stuff doesn't. But that's more, I think, looking at Spider-Man.
Yeah. Well, and that's just what's in the air and what's popular then, and what people think of as quote unquote badass, sunglasses and leather. You probably have music videos to blame for that more than anything.
Well, it's weird, especially when you look at X-Men, because it kind of never went away with X-Men. Like everything you just described is also in Origins, and that's in 2009.
But that's because but we weren't 100% out of it yet. I think with that,
No, of
you
course.
start to circle the drain where the question is this still a fad and popular, or has it been around? Has the franchise been around long enough now that it has to repeat itself because of nostalgia?
Yeah.
So now we're going back to the leather because that's a hallmark of this franchise, and because it makes people feel like they did 12 years ago when they first saw one of these.
Yeah, but like Wolverine never got to that place. Like X-Men, we at least get to like the yellow suits, but like the Wolverine movies never hit that point.
Yeah, exactly. But no, I think the Matrix has something to do with all of this. And that's not to say that we wouldn't have still gotten a superhero onslaught, and even that the Renaissance by 08 into the 2010s wouldn't have happened. But it would have looked different, and it might have taken longer. It's hard to say.
I don't know if it would have taken longer because it's like also starting at the same time, but it would have looked different. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, when I say it might have taken longer, it just kind of depends on what projects get greenlit and which ones don't. I mean, keep in mind, like, this could be a ridiculous statement to make, but I gotta say it out loud before I decide if it's stupid or not.
Okay. I'm ready to judge.
Batman Begins has nothing at all to do with the Matrix. And it's not even as stylized, of course, as a lot of comic movies because you've got Nolan trying to make a thing really grounded. But I don't know what movie Warner's wanted initially when they hired him to make that movie. I think they probably didn't expect a thing as grounded as they got, and they gave him a pretty lengthy rope to make it his way. So I guess what I'm saying is Warner Brothers also makes The Matrix. And when they start in on these more comic booky type things, like, is it possible that they're more in a hurry to pull the trigger on franchises like Batman that they haven't tried in a while because The Matrix was a success and now it's a franchise?
Yeah, I'm not sure because you also have Lord of the Rings, which is like the biggest thing ever, and that was Warner Brothers.
They're making a lot of money
New Line.
and Harry Potter too.
Yeah, and Harry Potter. Yeah, no. If anything, we're learning that Warner Brothers was just killing it in the early 2000s.
Yep.
Yeah, I've never really thought about it as well. You know, The Matrix took off, so we should try Batman again.
Yeah, I hadn't either.
They're looking.
And it doesn't sound as stupid as I thought it might, but it might be more of just a franchise thing.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I mean, we were definitely moving more towards that way, you know, after the 80s, and then
Daniver says Warner Brothers have been trying to reboot Batman for a while. I just think they wanted to keep the brand alive. Yeah, but they were.
Yeah, I agree.
But it was 7 years before they finally got it going again, so they were clearly gun shy. And at the point where they finally put it back into production again, and they rebooted, did a new thing, they got less gun shy. Why is that? You know, that's a question. And keep in mind, they start developing that. I don't actually know if there's a Matrix correlation. I'm just throwing the really, really anecdotal evidence in to say that at the point, and you're right about all the other franchises too, at the point where they start putting that into production, they've got a Matrix sequel and a Lord of the Rings sequel coming out.
Yeah, I don't know, because you know, you look at something like Spider-Man, and Spider-Man was also in development hell for a long time. But
I think Batman's different. I don't know if that was development hell. I mean, it is technically, but I mean, with Spider-Man, it was like even making a project happen in the first place. With Batman, it was we just can't decide what direction even makes sense to go after Batman and Robin. I just think they were gun shy.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of it too was just we can't get anything off the ground. Like, we don't even know what to do with it, which is definitely also part of Spider-Man. Like, it's hard to say. I don't know
if they had a creator that was comfortable with it until they found Nolan.
Yeah. Or if they were like fully willing to give in to Schumacher for whatever he wanted to do.
To the point about the Matrix visually obviously influencing everything for, again, better and worse, and often worse. it's
Definitely
interesting.
for worse.
It's interesting that through the 90s, yeah, but sometimes for the better, only not style wise, but just because of the techniques that it invented. Some of that we needed to make certain things happen. But anyway, it's interesting that in the late 80s into the 90s, when we weren't going to straight up pulp stuff, we were looking really hard at Frank Miller, and we get pretty hard away from Frank Miller by and large into the 2000s in favor of more kind of sci-fi stuff. And there is still some of it. Obviously, Daredevil happens, and 300 is Frank Miller, but it's not as heavy Frank Miller as the 90s felt to me.
And Begins has some Year One in it, but you're not getting anything like like RoboCop.
Yeah.
Or even this isn't a superhero thing, but it's the most ultimate Frank Miller movie, which is Predator 2.
Yeah, would you agree with me if I were to say that? Sorry, I lost my train of thought because then I was thinking about how shafted Frank Miller got in the movie again, and how unfortunate that was for him. But isn't it? Am I right in saying that we start turning superhero into a legit genre, and it doesn't feel as much like just a subgenre through some harder-edged movies, but then more of what we make is kind of lighter stuff. Even some of the stuff that feels like it should be hard-edged feels lighter. Like Ghost Rider is not a dark movie.
No, I'd say of the 2000 stuff, the only thing that's like hard edge is just the Blade movies.
Yeah, I mean, Daredevil thinks it is. Some of this is just the way these things age, I think. I mean, I think at the time we were thinking more of this was sort of edgy. So I don't know if the point I'm making... Say again?
That's the thing I mentioned with 89.
With 89.
Like, I've never seen 89 as like a dark movie.
Yeah. But like you've got the Fantastic Four movies, you've got Spider-Man, the X-Men movies were darker than those things. Mm-hmm. But they also didn't appeal as much to kids as some of these other things did.
And it's not like we fully lost that. Like I don't think like there are definitely movies that kids can watch. I don't think they're like hard edge. They just don't necessarily look like a comic book in the same way that something like Spider-Man or Superman does.
Yeah. And again, you had things like Constantine.
Yeah.
Which is more in line with Blade or something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just mean for its target audience. Those are different things, of course, but...
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
But you did have kind of the Spawn problem with some of those releases, right? Where we were trying too hard to make them PG-13 and kid-friendly and okay for everybody. Like, how do you make the same mistake with Ghost Rider that you made with Spawn?
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. Victor Herman in the comments. I forgot you also have the 2004 Punisher movie.
Right. And he says that has some pretty rough stuff. But a Punisher movie, I mean, it would have been really funny to get a PG-13 Punisher movie.
I mean, you can cut that movie into a PG-13 movie pretty easily, I feel.
Oh, do you think?
Oh, yeah. Like, I don't think that movie's super rough outside of, like, a couple shots.
Okay.
But,
I don't know. It always bothered me more than it did you. And just the overall flavor of it does not feel like a thing that children are intended to see.
Yeah. I mean, I watched that movie a lot as a kid, and I was like, this movie's awesome. I want to have that knife that, like, shoots out, and I can shoot a stupid guitar man.
But I don't know, there's just something about the atmosphere of that. But I'm glad he brought that up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. I don't know why you'd think that I would remember Punisher, because I love that character, but...
Well, that speaks to how much of it there was.
Yeah.
And there really was a lot of it.
Mm-hmm. But I think it helps, too, that it's like... I remember a lot of the extremes, where it's like, I like the Raimi Spider-Man movies. I like the X-Men movies. I really didn't like Fantastic Four, and I haven't revisited it, but I hated Hulk as a kid. And Punisher just kind of slips in the middle, where, like, I like that movie.
Well, and Hulk wasn't really a family movie either.
Yeah. Yeah, it's also
so I don't know if I'm right about the point I made that we get lighter in the 2000s, but it felt that way. I think maybe it's more variety than
I think it's just more variety.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Let me ask you this question.
Yeah.
What do you think was, and of course you're younger than me, so you experienced this decade differently, but
yeah, we're into my childhood.
Right. What do you think, looking back on it, the overall reputation for Marvel was? Because you don't have the MCU, you don't have a shared universe, but a lot of the successes had that brand on them.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember even at the time, people, maybe they were all in the know, I'm not sure, talking about Marvel movies already.
Mm-hmm. No, I think it did really well for that. Even though they weren't all great, the big good ones that people talked about were Marvel and
Batman.
Yeah, and Batman. But yeah, because I'm thinking like earlier. But yeah, then you have Batman in 2005. Yep. Like there's just a lot more of Marvel, so it's that thing where they're just throwing darts at the board, and more of them are sticking. So, no, I think the 2000s overall were a good period for Marvel in terms of public reception.
Yeah. And then there's the question of, and I don't want to get too ahead of ourselves yet, because we haven't really gotten into more of the weeds with X-Men and Spider-Man and stuff, and we may want to talk about those franchises a little bit more in depth. But how much of the reputation then that Marvel had garnered with particularly Spider-Man and X-Men was necessary to get us into the MCU, or do you think Iron Man stands alone as a film in a way that you wouldn't have needed any movies? Like, does Iron Man do the same, and does it affect the world the same if those other movies never get made?
No, I think you need that. I think you need that early Marvel period for Iron to hit, especially to hit as hard as it does. Because even, like I remember being a kid and it was like, oh, here's like the next Marvel movie. It's Iron Man. And then you watched it and it was like, oh, there's something different about this movie, though. Like it doesn't feel like one of those movies. You know what I mean? Like
so you need that contrast.
A step ahead. Yeah. No, I think you definitely need that contrast. Especially because I remember, and I think I talked about this in other videos. Oh, I think it was in the X2 thing. Where like I think you need a lot of that material before it for stuff like Iron Man landing down in that village and just like taking out a bunch of terrorists, for that to hit as hard as it does, because you're not expecting it in a Marvel movie.
Yeah, and it's subverting expectations in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like the identity thing, I don't think plays as well if you don't have an entire Spider-Man trilogy about it before that.
Yeah.
No, I think all that's very important.
You've got a love interest that is more integrated to the story and isn't used as a damsel in distress, and a lot of things we hadn't done very much of yet.
Yeah. The closest thing that I can think of to just being one of them is just like the villain. Like at a certain point, Obadiah Stane kind of falls off and goes into what the early 2000s Marvel thing was, which is just well, the actor's really good, so I like the villain. Like that's what Willem Dafoe's Green Goblin is. Like his character doesn't make any sense, but Willem Dafoe's awesome. So Green Goblin's kind of awesome.
So nobody cares, even though that could have been a smarter, more sophisticated character, a more layered character. Yeah,
exactly. Because only Spectacular's gotten Green Goblin right. Everything else fails.
Well, and isn't it interesting that Iron Man feels like just a movie that's not where superhero was more in the background for a lot of it, especially to people that liked that movie and don't care about superhero things, right? And then people complained that it degenerates in the third act into more typical superhero fare, where we have to have a big fight with a villain and he's not really making a lot of sense in the choices he's making. But then that ends up being the main complaint that people have about MCU movies going all the way up until today.
And I also didn't hear it as much about Iron Man when it came out. Like just in terms of talking to people about it, it was just like the movie was overall really good. Another big thing, because I still remember the first time I saw Iron Man, and I went with my mom, her friend, and her friend's kid who was 6. And I remember they had to walk out like 20 minutes in because that movie was like way too hardcore for her kid, and he like could not handle it. And I just remember being like, whoa, like this is like a Marvel movie that like you have to walk your kid out of. Like that's insane.
Yeah.
Like that's completely unheard of.
Let me read a couple. That's absolutely right. Let me read a couple of comments here. Alex Barron says the rise of the superhero genre is also probably linked to the rise of CG. Without that, it would have been very difficult or impossible to adapt certain characters. It is a perfect storm in that way, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And
that's a terrific point.
Yeah, and it's interesting because in some places I feel like it kind of came a little too early. Like, the CGI in 2 and 3 look great, but the first Spider-Man movie has some like major Toy Story CGI in places.
Well, and speaking of the Matrix, I mean, it's that Matrix Reloaded problem where we got way too big for our britches and thought that the technology could do things that we just couldn't make look anything like real yet. Where you get those.
Well, Blade 2 has it as well.
Those rubbery figures like you had in Daredevil.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. No, I think Blade 2 has some of the worst of it as well.
Yeah.
You have that stuff like early on when they're fighting in front of the spotlights, I think.
But even Spider-Man 2 has some of it.
See, I think of it more so as just the first movie. Is mainly when I have CGI issues.
I remember it being pretty impressive at the time and not aging the best. It helps that we're backed off pretty far from the characters when they're fully CG, but there still is some of that Daredevil stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure there's definitely shots. You have stuff like the like the big famous train scene, and like I think that still is some of the best CGI in a Spider-Man movie.
No, I agree, but I'm thinking more when Spider-Man and Doc Ock are falling from a high place.
And sure, yeah.
Hitting each other for no good reason on the way down. That CG does not age great.
You're right about that. That specific shot doesn't look great.
Yeah. And I don't mean to make an argument based on one shot, but it does stand out.
That's also the one shot in 3 that doesn't look great.
Yeah.
Which is when Spider-Man and Venom are falling. And then that shot is also in Black Panther. And it also doesn't look good.
Yeah, and I never noticed it as hard in Black Panther. I've always heard you say, I need to go back and look at that scene because it never bugged me in that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, because part of it, I mean, we'll get there eventually, but with Black Panther, it's just the CGI in the third act is so bad. And then there's so many shots where I'm like, you just stole that shot from something else. So it makes it so much worse. Like you have the shot from X-Men where Wolverine gets thrown and he does the spin around the Statue of Liberty head that was in like every trailer, and they like recreate that shot, and it's really weird. But anyways,
man, I never had that thought. But to what you said about Spider-Man 3, it's also kind of, we're getting again ahead of ourselves here, but we're at least still in the 2000s. But
I at least brought it back to X-Men.
But I just want to say real quick that it is kind of interesting how inconsistent that could get with some of the with those movies, right? Where you have some of the best CG and some of the not as good, or maybe some of the worst. Like in Spider-Man 3, you were talking about that scene that doesn't look great, but then that fight with Harry Osborn toward the beginning is phenomenal.
Well, and the crane scene is like some of the best Spider-Man action.
Maybe some green screen shots, but like that still impresses me.
Yeah. No, Spider-Man 3 is some of the best Spider-Man action just ever put to film. Well, and then you have stuff like Ghost Rider. Like Ghost Rider, I remember being a very impressive movie, and I don't think it is really
Isn't
anymore.
That weird? Yeah, it's not.
Like I watch it, I'm like, oh, he looks off. He looks great in Spirit of Vengeance, but in the first movie, he is a little off.
Yeah, but that's that same sad tale with Mark Steven Johnson, where he's not given enough money and he really doesn't know what he's doing to make a movie like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's unfortunate because Daredevil and Ghost Rider were both movies I loved as a kid, and I still appreciate Daredevil. I mean, we'll see when we get to Ghost Rider. I don't know if I'll have that, but at least I have a sequel with that I adore.
We're just gonna show up with a big bucket of jelly beans for that one.
Oh, don't even get me started.
Okay, Great says, I think we got more colorful in the 2000s. Raimi helped to embrace brighter costumes and lighter tones. What happens to the genre? What a great observation. What happens to the genre if X-Men is made and is successful, and X2 comes out exactly the same way as it did, and it wouldn't have been influenced too much by Spider-Man because they're made more or less at the same time, and Spider-Man doesn't actually come out? Like, does everything, is it the Batman 89 thing where a lot more things look like X-Men? Because I think he's right that that's just so massively influential.
Well, because Fantastic Four and Daredevil, I mean, Daredevil's like a weird mix between both of them, but Fantastic Four isn't going to look like how that movie does, I don't think.
Well, I also wonder if it even affects what, like some of the choices of what to adapt, you know?
I think Daredevil.
Fox doesn't want to lose that license, so maybe they make Fantastic Four regardless. But I don't know. Maybe it looks a little bit more like what Trank did with it that early. I don't know.
Yeah, who knows? Well, and specifically because you mentioned like the color and the costume thing, I think it's interesting that X-Men and Blade and whatnot are all moving away from that, and Spider-Man like reels it back closer to the comics. But not for like any of the villains. It's just Spider-Man, and I think that's interesting. And then Fantastic Four comes in and goes, okay, the Fantastic Four, Silver Surfer, and Doctor Doom can look comic accurate, but Galactus can't. And then you know what I mean? Like there's just like it's like we're getting bit by bit. Like we can have certain things.
That's part of the whole growing pains thing. And
exactly.
As I said last episode, I don't want to get too into TV with this whole thing, but you're also seeing it on television at the same time, where like Smallville cannot decide how much of a superhero show it wants to be. And when they start finally doing costumes, they're real weird about it, where sometimes they look real comic booky and sometimes it's somebody wearing a hoodie or spray painting their face. Like, it's weird. And the movies absolutely had that problem. And that's part of why I call it the growing pains period, where we're testing the waters, man. We're dipping our toe in and seeing how hot or cold it is.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's weird, right? Because Green Goblin gets a costume, a terrible costume in the first Spider-Man movie, but he gets a costume. And then 2 and 3 are more like 2000s-y with its villain design in a weird way. And the Doc Ock's just wearing a trench coat. The new Goblin design is like the leather Green Goblin outfit.
Yeah, and it's like, how realistic...
It's like we walked it back a little bit.
How realistic, air quotes, do you need to be in Spider-Man when he's wearing a spandex suit like that and when you have superpowers? Because I would think the conventional wisdom would say, if you're making a movie that's going to appeal more to kids than adults, and it's heightened enough, it's supernatural enough that your main character has powers... You just embrace a lot more of the comic book stuff, and you and you go more toyetic, more comic iconic.
Yeah, and it's funny because the only villain design that is right out of the comics is Sandman.
Yeah,
because it's just beige pants.
Because it's just a big thing
shirt.
of sand.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Venom kind of.
Yeah.
I mean, what's weird is that they went so conservative with the black costume, where it has to just be the same suit spray painted black, but then Venom himself still gets his face and everything.
Well, it's so weird, right? Because the black suit and Venom both have that Green Goblin thing, where there's behind the scenes footage of way better Green Goblin stuff, with like the moving face and whatnot.
Yeah.
And then there's also behind the scenes pictures.
Did they compromise on that just because of cost?
I'm not sure. I've always wondered if it was maybe they thought it would be too silly. I don't know. Maybe they thought it was too scary. I don't know.
What they did. It's sort of like the problem you'll have later with Lizard, where it's like you guys got so conservative that it got goofier than if you had just done it straight.
Yeah, no, and his design looks awful. He's just a Goomba.
Yeah, it's terrible.
I will never be convinced on the whole. Well, you can't have a snout because you can't lip sync it. We had Rocket Raccoon. You can't convince me on that. And I know that comes out after, but people still argue that to this day.
Well, I thought that was we're getting way ahead of ourselves now, but I thought that was the argument from the filmmakers.
It was, but I still hear people say that you can't make that work. Like when we.
But are you saying you don't even trust that that's the reason they did it? Because it was always a really weird explanation to me.
Yeah, no, I mean, I don't.
He doesn't even talk very much when he's the Lizard.
Yeah, Oh, it's stupid. But
I would have
anyways,
just cut some dialogue because I mean he's got that one scene where he's got to give a bunch of exposition, but I don't know, just shoot that in shadow.
just have him be like, Peter.
Yeah.
But anyways, 3 also has behind the scenes stuff where you have like a more comic accurate black suit. And in the first trailer, when they do like the Venom shot where he roars at the camera, it's like he doesn't have the webs. Like he's a lot bulkier. He looks more like comic book Venom. It's really weird.
Yeah, they're changing it after the fact. They're not conceptualizing it as getting as far away from the comics and being as realistic as possible.
Mm-hmm.
Jareth Gearhart says the tone of 2000s comic book films would be a lot different without 9/11, and that's kind of true of just entertainment.
Everything, yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
There is that question, of course, as to how much of an influence that has on visual design and stuff versus the other influences that we talked about. Where, like, I think that certainly has a lot to do with story selection and stuff. Obviously, Iron Man is not that movie without 9/11. But
what I was about to say is I feel like the 9/11 influence comes a little bit later because we're not as willing to go there in the early 2000s. But by the time you get to 08, like both Iron Man and Dark Knight have it, and then we get like more and more of it after that.
Yeah, or the influence is different. You know what I mean?
Yeah, exactly.
Where like by avoiding, but what I mean is by avoiding certain things, you are influenced by it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I just mean in terms of like addressing kind of the ideas of the time with 9/11.
Yeah, but even if you're not addressing it, that event changes the way people are making entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
Pros and cons guy, $5 super chat. Thanks, man. He says, I was wondering why the X-Men movies are inconsistent.
Because they were made by hacks.
Well, riddle me this. If Bryan Singer had stayed on board through 3 and whatever might have happened after that, do you think we would have had a lot less of that inconsistency problem? Because I think if he makes 3, they probably, have a better sense of at least their own continuity there. Once you start going backwards, and if Origin still happens, I think all bets are off. I don't know, but I think at least that trilogy probably would have been better.
Yeah, no, I think it would have stuck the landing of 3 hopefully a little bit more.
When I say inconsistent, even into 3, because I've always said this, and sometimes people don't know what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the fact that the world doesn't feel entirely like the same world, right? Where you start talking about mutants having it's been a while since I've seen this movie. About there being like a number given to like stronger mutants and weaker mutants and all of that. How does that come out of nowhere? And things like that. Like,
mm-hmm. You would definitely be more consistent.
You wouldn't have had that,
mm-hmm.
right? The spectrum thing.
Well, and then if X-Men 3 is better, like how does that affect what they do moving forward? Like, do you still get the history after that with Origins, and then like you probably wouldn't have rebooted. You probably would have just gotten an X-Men 4.
Well, no, because Origins was supposed to be the beginning of its own franchise in a way. I mean, it's really funny. I just thought of this, how this anthology thing has never really worked for anything. Like, you give it what sounds like a direct-to-video subtitle, right? X-Men Origins or a Star Wars story, and then you make 1, and in Star Wars case you made 2, and then no more. But like, if X-Men Origins had happened, you would have had the Magneto movie, because that they were talking about that was supposed to be the next one.
Well, yeah, and I think if I remember correctly, I think the writers of that movie sued Fox after First Class came out.
Interesting.
If I remember correctly,
for stealing ideas that they put in a script.
Yeah, and then who knows if that's true or if it's just basic ideas you would have naturally making an origin movie with Magneto. Who knows? But yeah. DJ says Ditko Lizard is better than Dinosaur Lizard. I agree, but I don't think he looks like Ditko Lizard in that movie. Like, it's I don't know. Like, I don't think it works at all in that.
Yeah, I agree.
And No Way Home tries to make him look a little bit more like Ditko Lizard, where he's got like the forehead ridges and stuff, but it also looks bad. Like, I love Ditko Lizard. If he looked more like that, I'd be happy. But he doesn't. Looks like a Goomba.
Yes, he does. So, if we want to compare decades, the big difference between the 90s and the 2000s, obviously, is superhero movies seem to be on a big rise, a big high in the early 90s, even before we were thinking about it as much like a genre with Batman and Ninja Turtles, and then there were a lot of attempted franchise starters. And in the late 90s, interestingly, and maybe even ironically, you had a couple of franchises that got started that we needed for the onslaught to happen. But the late 2000s, it really solidifies and gels as, okay, these things aren't going anywhere anytime soon. And we start seeing Hollywood do the opposite of what they were doing in the 90s, where in the 90s they were, kind of clutching their pearls a little bit. We'll maybe attempt, a thing every now and again. Different studios would have like the one thing they'd try, and some of them, even the successful ones, weren't even attempted as franchises, like, or didn't end up becoming franchises. Like The Mask was supposed to have a sequel, but they ended up not doing that. And then
and Son of the Mask is around this period that we're in,
right? Not counting the stupid thing they finally did make, but I don't know if you know that, like, there was supposed to be a Mask 2.
Yeah, there was like
2
a whole
or 3 years
Nintendo
after
Power contest to be in the Mask 2.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's kind of nuts that Hollywood just 10 years before this is like, we don't know about these comic book things. I guess we'll occasionally attempt one. By the end of the 2000s, it looked like it was becoming a fad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly.
That's when 2010, Kick-Ass, 2009, Watchmen. I mean, we're really starting to greenlight these things left and right now.
Mm-hmm. No, if you don't have 2008 and stuff in 2009 and 2010 and whatnot, I think these movies would have just fizzled out on the trajectory they were going. Because by the mid to late 2000s, X-Men's fizzled out, Spider-Man's fizzled out, Blade fizzled out. Like, all of this big stuff we started with in the 2000s are fizzling out by 2007.
Yeah. And Sony could not successfully reboot Spider-Man. Whether you really like Amazing or not, it was not beloved. Mm-hmm. And the MCU retained people's interest in superhero stuff, where in the 2000s, it's Spider-Man. It feels like almost singularly keeping eyes on superhero stuff, where if that isn't huge with the kids and everything, you're people are not on this kind of superhero high. Even with Batman and everything, I think, because like Batman Begins was successful, but like it wasn't Spider-Man. People weren't talking about it like that. It wasn't until Dark Knight that came back in that big of a way again.
Yeah, when as a kid, like, I think all of those Marvel movies were really big. Like, everyone I knew in school talked about Hulk, and they talked about Fantastic Four, and they talked about, all these things. Like, I remember going to people's houses for like sleepovers and whatnot, and they'd be like, "Do you want to watch Fantastic Four?" And I'm like, "No, I hate that movie." Or, "Do you want to watch Hulk?" And I'm like, "No, it's boring. Let's watch X-Men or Spider-Man."
But that's why I think it's interesting that the flip kind of happens, and it's the other Marvel movies that are floating interest enough in Spider-Man for it to finally come back in a big way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, definitely. No, that's the I think is funny when I look back at it, where it's like I couldn't tell you that Daredevil was a movie people didn't like, because like kids at my school love Daredevil. Like, my mom and I love Daredevil. We watched it constantly. Like, it was just it's another one of these movies. Like, everybody loves Daredevil.
And I felt like I was on an island with that movie, because I'm 18 when that comes out, 17, 18, and I don't have a lot of friends that are into it. And
I got tricked into my Daredevil 2 thing.
And I wasn't a kid. Sorry, what?
I got tricked into thinking Daredevil 2 was real.
Oh, right. Yeah, you've talked about that.
Yeah,
and so that's just that's such a crazy perspective in my brain, because like I knew it did decently well at the box office, but I didn't know anybody else that liked it.
Yeah, no. Well, the other big thing, and this isn't a movie, but Teen Titans was huge when I was a kid. Like, everybody loved Teen Titans.
Yep. And I totally missed the boat on that, but that was the thing I started realizing in college, because there were some I don't know, some people I went to school with that were really obsessed with that I guess kept watching cartoons when I didn't. I don't know.
You're like, I got a girlfriend, I ain't watching this cartoon.
Well, it's not that. I just kind of, I just kind of forgot about cartoons.
No, I mean, everybody hits that point, right, when you're not keeping up with that stuff anymore.
Yeah.
We all have that moment. It's okay. But no, like I remember, going to school with like a backpack loaded of, X-Men and Ghost Rider and Hulk and all these different toys. I had a thing, just like all these different things. And at lunchtime we would all, play Marvel. And I think that's a big part of why as a kid I didn't like Batman or like anything DC, was because Marvel was like the in thing, where everybody was watching Marvel movies, everybody was, enjoying them, and even the ones that turned out they weren't, like I was still seeing that.
Yeah, did DC stuff kind of feel like it was outdated?
I don't know. I just remember as a kid it was like, and it obviously helps with people that I'm around. Like my mom doesn't care about comics, she liked that stuff because I did, and my dad grew up a Marvel reader, so like when I talk to him he's like DC, even to this day,
Yeah.
So that's just a lot of what I saw, and I think that definitely helped.
Well, and the history of Warner's attempt at DC things through the 2000s is really interesting, because like I said earlier, they got Batman back in obviously a massive way, and it was ultimately bigger than anything Marvel would put out until you got to Avengers. And yet they couldn't get other franchises going for their big superheroes. They made the worst mistake I think they could have made, probably, in the way they handled Superman, in just doing a throwback thing and going back to Donner and making it this very confused mess where you couldn't tell if it was really in that continuity or not. But it's hard to say if even a really great comic book Superman, like how well that would have performed right then.
When I remember Superman Returns, because that was the first movie I saw in IMAX, and it was one of those movies where it was like, okay, when this happens, when this flashes on the screen, like put your 3D glasses on. It was one of those.
Yeah.
And I saw that in like a big theater, like I said, IMAX, and I walked out and I was like, whoa, like that was the most amazing thing ever. Like I thought Superman sucked, but that was so cool. And my mom got me the DVD for Christmas, and I could never watch it again. It was always super boring.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because I always kind of lose perspective a little bit when we talk about Superman Returns, because it ultimately failed. They didn't make any more. I don't remember what it did at the box office, but I remember
it did well enough to get a sequel, because they talked about it for a while.
I remember it doing okay, and I remember everybody having that I talked to having the same experience with it, which was it was almost like we all got subliminal messaged or something to go there and love it, and then later on go, wait, what were we thinking? And it was really weird. Like everybody had a good theatrical experience with that, or a lot of people did.
Its time.
And I wonder, say again.
It's kind of ahead of its time in that that's all we were doing in the 2010s with the soft reboot thing. In a way, it's ahead of its time,
it's so weird to say it like that, right? Because the problem is that it's going backwards, while sort of pretending to go forwards.
That's all we were doing.
But the point I wanted to make about about Superman right then, like, what would you have needed to do to have a, like, Dark Knight sort of level success? Or maybe that's not fair because you needed Begins to get to Dark Knight, but, and I don't know how Superman Returns performed next to Batman Begins. I bet the numbers aren't that different.
I wouldn't be shocked because, like I said, Returns did well enough that they talked about the sequel. Like, if I remember correctly, I think the sequel was supposed to be like his son gets possessed and kills Lex Luthor, and then Superman kills his son.
Yeah, that whole thing.
That whole thing, yeah.
But what I'm getting at is, I wonder if the problem wasn't Spider-Man is already scratching the itch that, in a way, Superman would have or could have, right? Because it's lighter in contrast to some of the other, you know, darker superhero things happening right then, and it's aimed very much at kids and families, and it's like brighter and more optimistic.
So I've said for years now that I think a lot of the reasons why, though I like them, the Raimi movies don't fully gel with me is because to a degree, they are more Superman movies than they are Spider-Man.
Interesting.
Where you have like the thing where he's kind of, you know, the big, larger-than-life character that I don't think Spider-Man really is. And like I think some of that stuff from Superman kind of carries over.
Yeah, maybe influence it too much, which is weird because then Danny Elfman is doing the score.
Yeah, exactly. When then you get, you know, obviously superficial stuff, like you get like the big Superman shot where he rips his shirt.
Yeah, I've always hated that.
Yeah, not Superman, you know.
Don't do that. Yeah. No, they're really thinking that. And but in their defense too, how much of that is because there's not much else in the like family superhero genre to compare it to at that time. That's like real mainstream. Like the superhero movie that kids have seen that's not Batman, presumably is Superman.
Yeah. When I mean with Spider-Man,
even in 2002,
I think when you're making that, there's at least a part of your mind is thinking about like normies that are watching it. Where you have people like my stepdad who has on multiple occasions gone, you know, when you think about it, Spider-Man and Superman are the same character. They both wear red and blue. They have the Daily Planet versus the Daily Bugle. They're pretty much the same character.
It's like, no, not at all.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, there's superficial things that you can look at, you know, but
yeah, like a kid or an average moviegoer that's and I don't mean to sound, you know, belittling or conceited or whatever, but an average moviegoer that's going for the action, that's not really thinking about character stuff, I can see how they would get to that, because for you and I, superhero is this very broad category where you have a bunch of different characters that are all about different things. But for somebody that goes to not very many superhero movies and just wants to see the big popcorn action thing and a blockbuster, they go, yeah, superhero, puts on a suit, goes and saves people, has a secret identity, the end. Spider-Man and Superman are the same. You know, they've both got secret identities. Never mind that one's an alien and one is from New York. Never mind that one is a immigrant and the other one is from here, you know, et cetera, et cetera. Never mind that
sprays webbing.
Yeah, never mind that one has the tragic backstory of feeling indirectly responsible for his uncle's murder, and the other one has the tragic backstory of his whole planet exploded and he never went there. Yeah, they're very different things. but you would be really comparing them at that point. And it's also really interesting that Superman invented, or well, I can't say that it invented this formula, but it goes to the big, like traditional epic 3-act structure, where it goes through like a lot of a guy's life from beginning to, you know, in his 30s. And Spider-Man is starting what, and I've said this before, but is starting what felt to me when I first saw that movie as what the superhero movie formula should be and always has been, and yet this is the first time I'm looking at it. But I'm watching this movie going, this feels really kind of cliche and quaint, and I could and cookie cutter, and I can tell exactly where everything is going. And then I walked out of the theater and I went, but we hadn't made one of those yet.
It's the Halloween. It locks everything down into place, and it's like, okay, this is the exact template you have to look at moving forward. And one of the big things,
and then a lot of the 2000s movies are looking at that and in doing that same thing, which is why Iron Man and Dark Knight in the same year are so important, because they get so far and away from that, both of them.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the big things I wish that people looked at more with the first Spider-Man is how small that climax is. Like, even the sequels to that movie never get back to that. Like, there is just a visceral feel to the ending of that movie where like it's a little bit dirtier and grittier and like bloodier than we normally get for this kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true. And yeah, I mean, I keep talking about it as look how lighthearted it is, but look how bloody Spider-Man is at the end of that movie.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like
he really takes a beating.
He and Green
which gives
Goblin
you a sense of the stakes,
like,
and the stakes are all personal. I mean, like, yeah, there's a trolley with some kids, but you know they're not gonna die.
Yeah. No, they're like dirty looking, and I don't. There's just something that we've never really gotten back to in that movie, and it's a shame.
No, that's a really great point.
That was something I was told I was going to get with Blue Beetle, and then it did not do that.
Yeah,
I was
really.
sold on it. It's the first thing that feels like the climax of Spider-Man, and no.
But that's probably why the formulaic nature of it didn't really hurt it, and why it worked on different levels for different audiences, right? Because for kids, it's a fun, high-flying action movie, and then for adults, I mean, like but it also has that edgy thing that Ninja Turtles and Batman had, where it's like, this was sold to me, but there are scenes where I feel like I'm not supposed to be watching it, and kids love that feeling. But then adults could look at it and be like, oh wow, there's a little bit of grit, there's a little bit of real world. The protagonist feels like I mean, we know he's gonna make it, but for a second, you know, it feels like maybe he won't.
Yeah, that was a big thing I felt as a kid when you have that big moment where the Green Goblin whips out that trident from out of nowhere, and he goes to stab Spider-Man in the face. Like, I genuinely, as a kid, thought he was going to die in that scene, and it was one of the few places in one of these movies that I had that.
Yeah, so it gives you that gamut of emotion and of I don't know. It gives you both the light and the dark of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I think I had that a little bit with 3 as a kid, where it was like, okay, this is the third one. It's probably the last one because it's the third one. So like, they're making it seem like he's probably gonna die. Like that could happen.
Well, and in its way, and I'll finish off with this point because we're past an hour. But in its way, the not exactly the way we're talking about, where like you're maybe afraid for your protagonist or whatever, but that was some of the magic of the original Superman, where he had that stalwart, always does the right thing characterization, but he feels like a real person who totally loses it when his girlfriend dies. And yeah, he flies the world backwards, but the last thing you expected going into that movie in 1978 was seeing Christopher Reeve just freak the hell out when he flies out into space. It's wonderful. And that Spider-Man was kind of recapturing that.
Yeah, we have that moment where he has that like incredibly angry face when he's holding the trident thing back, and he throws him, and he just starts wailing on the Green Goblin.
That's it.
Something that it's always made me laugh, like even as a kid, was that he punches his clearly plastic mask and it makes metal ding noises. but also, yeah, like a few times it doesn't, like it's inconsistent.
But yeah, you care more when your hero does the right thing when he's so tempted to do the wrong thing. He can't just be perfect all the time, and the world has to beat down on him some.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And you're seeing that kind of level of humanity, which I guess you get with the burglar thing too, where you have that whole thing where he comes at him all angry and the guy trips out the window.
And it just makes it easier to buy the conceits in the internal logic.
Mm-hmm.
When that real human stuff is there.
Real human emotion, right?
We just got a couple of super chats to end out the show, so I'll read these real quick. And Austin, when we come back for part 4, do you feel like it's the right time to go ahead and get into the beginnings of the MCU and the Dark Knight trilogy and all of that, or is there a little bit more Spider-Man X-Men we need to talk about?
I think we should only talk about the Tim Story FF movies for part 4.
Okay, I mean, I can try.
It's this giant cloud we gotta peel back a little.
We gotta avenge Saturn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we gotta avenge Sevenfold, really. I don't know, I'm fine with whatever. If you feel like we should move on to Begins and then Dark Knight in the beginning of the MCU, or if there's more things you want to tackle with this, then...
Yeah, well, I'm sitting here feeling like we really glossed over some of the major stuff with X-Men and Spider-Man, but then part of it is we talk about those all the time. So I'm like, how much more, rehashing going into that stuff do we really need to do? Like I feel like we've kind of talked about the influences and why they matter for what happens after them.
I think part of it is we definitely talked about Spider-Man more so, and I think part of that is we just did X2 in the commentary project. So like some of that we've already kind of talked about. And then we talked more so broadly about Marvel as a whole.
Well, maybe it'll naturally win its way back in. Because what we should do is come back and get to like the middle of the 2000s and just start at 05 and talk about Batman Begins into Dark Knight. And I'm sure some of that other mid-2000s stuff will come back to us too.
Oh, yeah. Like I mentioned Hellboy exists. When we get to 2008, when we talk about Hellboy 2.
Right, yeah.
I can talk about that in the same way that we can talk about Begins.
Yeah, and it's hard for me to say very much with as far as history goes with movies like that, except, I mean, they happened.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, I like them, but I don't know how, like, extremely influential Hellboy really was. Like, it's so much more of kind of a cult following kind of movie.
I would imagine it probably helped get some indie stuff made.
Oh, maybe so. Sure.
Mm-hmm. But, that's kind of a chain, right? Where Del Toro does Blade 2 in order to get to do Hellboy.
Oh, yeah. That's true. Pros and Cons guy had a $5 super chat and says, Ninja Turtles tried to give TMNT tried to give Mikey his own movie. I want a Mikey movie where he will get his time to shine. Well, at this point, what you would get would be Last Ronin.
Or you could do...
but it was way too popular, and it's all people care about with Ninja Turtles right now. So the only way you get a solo Michelangelo movie is Last Ronin.
When he's getting a game, so...
Yeah, exactly.
There you go, yeah. But I want a fellow Chucker, a turtle story. That would be the title. You will believe Turtle can chuck is the tagline.
I want Donatello's solo movie to be called Pork Rinds.
Yeah, no, exactly.
The only solo Ninja Turtles thing that not to say that Last Ronin couldn't be made as a wonderful standalone film, because absolutely it could. But yeah, the only thing that I would really get that excited about would be like a Casey Jones movie.
Yeah. Also for the Mikey movie, the tagline could also be how much none could a Mikey chuck if a Mikey could chuck none. Would also be a good tagline.
Burned in $1.99. Just got here. Cool glasses, Austin. Goodbye.
Oh,
everybody that wasn't on the previous show that we did this evening is talking about your glasses, Austin.
Well, thank you. I guess.
They look great. I didn't recognize you at first.
Don't patronize me. Burned in.
No, it took me no time at all to adjust to. Like,
you didn't even say anything when we came in. It was just like, oh yeah, you got glasses now.
Well, and I mean, I knew you were getting glasses, but like but I guess the compliment I'm making is they naturally go with your face. Like you picked the right ones,
Yeah, that's the big thing I've heard is that I picked the right one, and they just kind of look natural on me.
You've never had them, so nobody's used to looking at you with them, but I think you picked the right ones so that people will very quickly forget that you didn't always have them.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's my favorite part is I get to start gaslighting people.
Oh my god. Apologies to anybody that's only listening to this and not looking at Austin right now. William Kellogg, can you do a list of the most important superhero films? My immediate response to that is everybody kind of knows what they are.
Okay, so you have Howard the Duck, and then...
But like, is that a video? Or is that a thing to do as part of this? Like, I kind of feel like... Or is it a debate that you have where it's like, by most important, you mean the ones that you have to get to where we are now? Or because you're not saying like most successful when you say important, because successful is obvious. You can just look at dollars.
You can also take it two ways. You could say what are the most important superhero movies ever made in terms of the genre, which we could definitely do at the end of this. Like, what do you think is broad strokes the most important? But you could also do what is the most important for me personally, which doesn't even necessarily have to be like a top 20. It could just be like, yeah, I mean, I don't really like it that much anymore, but like Daredevil was super important to me at a time. You know what I mean?
Yeah, you mean like the ones that
take it that way,
the ones that shape you at all and make you, which might sound silly to people that aren't like huge into this, but like. I was massively influenced.
Yours, so.
I was massively influenced by superhero movies. Like in a lot of stuff, like in the way I played with toys and in my writing and a lot of things. But yeah, you're right. I mean, there's a couple different ways to take that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, truly, I have a fascination of soulmates that can never be together because of the 90s Spider-Man cartoon ending.
That's hilarious.
Every soulmate gets thrown through time.
Guys, we're going to do another one of these in 2 weeks. In the meantime, next Friday night, we're not doing it this week because Austin
Thanksgiving
isn't going to be here. He's got Canadian Thanksgiving. So Jason and I are doing a show on Friday that's not Rewind, but we're going to do a watch party for Cosmic Fury, the new Power Ranger show. And then next Friday night, Austin and I are going to do another double feature. We're going to knock out Spawn and Mystery Men. So look forward to that. I haven't started preparing for it. I'm probably going to watch Spawn tomorrow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, next week's my reading week, so I got lots of time to prepare for that. So,
okay, sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, everybody, thanks a lot for watching. We sure appreciate it. We especially want to thank all of our patrons and our Patreon producers. If you'd like to become a producer, you can go to patreon.com/geekvolution, and the $10 tier makes that possible. One of the things I do is read all of the producer names at the end of everything that has Superhero Rewind in the title. And I sometimes have Austin do it with me, but I'm going to rattle them off real fast by myself this time.
So I can finally read them, and now I don't get to.
No, okay, fine. I'll let you do it. Hold on.
You can rattle through them. It's fine.
No, it's fine. It's fine. I would hate to deprive you.
If anything, I'm going to lean farther back because I can now. I don't have to be like...
The man doesn't even know if... Clearly, you're nearsighted.
I don't know.
You're like, I don't even know if I'm nearsighted. Yeah, you're near. If you have to look really close to it, you're nearsighted. That's what that means.
Well, it's just because it's small.
But anyway, you can also, if you become a producer, you have some influence in some of the movies that we choose for the show. You can hang out with me about once a month. What do we settle on for our next meeting with the Rewind Discord?
Oh, I don't know. I never remember if we have things.
We picked a bad. We're doing Dark Knight Rises.
Oh, Dark Knight Rises.
Sometime this month we're watching Dark Knight Rises. That's what it is.
That's right, because it was like 6 people voted for Rises, and you were like, Austin, do you want to nominate something to be voted on? And I was like, well, there's 6 votes on Rises.
There's 8 people in this call, so I guess it's gonna be Rises.
It's gonna be Rises.
But yeah, and you can talk to us on the Discord. Lots of cool perks for the Superhero Rewind producer tier, and we're going to say thanks right now to everybody that is subscribed to that tier, including one reply.
Bill Mills.
Chewbacca's lover.
Dr. Hello.
Hello. Elliot Slater.
Gipster123.
Hayden Spring.
Joe Turner.
Joe Chira.
Bat68.
Michael Martin.
SS Jerry.
Thomas Edgehill.
Adam March.
Damon Begay.
Hot Soup.
Jacob Schneider.
Jonathan Campbell.
Justin Hayes.
Kareem Roberts.
Matthew Brody.
Michael Austin Gulick.
Miguel Rodriguez.
Me.
Unknown passenger.
Wendell Jones.
And that is everybody. Once again, we appreciate you watching live or after the fact. And Jeff Gearhart says, make sure to talk about Watchmen next time, Cap. Well, yeah, that'll be the end of the 2000s.
Yep.
And we talked a little bit about a couple things from the late 2000s, but we were really kind of focused in on 99 to like 04, I think.
Oh yeah, all that Marvel hit or missness.
Yep, exactly. Appreciate you guys. Hope you had a good time. We certainly did, and we'll see you again real shortly with more fun live streams here on Geekflution. I was Captain Logan, and this was Austin the Day Ghost.
And I'm me. Bye, folks.
Bye, everybody.
See ya.